Well, we'll start with the final two papers of the day. Our next presenter is Susan Dixon. Susan Dixon is a historian of the architecture and culture of early modern Rome. She has her PhD from Cornell University and is a professor of art history at the University of Tulsa. She is keenly interested in early archaeology and has published studies on the archaeological illustrations of Giovanni Battista Piranesi. She has also published a superb study on the literary club to which Vasi belonged. And here it is in my hand, again brandished for your benefit, entitled Between the Real and the Ideal, the Accademia degli Arcadi and its Garden in 18th Century Rome. And as I was preparing the section of my own essay in the Vasi catalog, I relied heavily on this. It was at the very front of my desk for a little while. This came out in 2006 and provides some of the deep foundations that she's drawing on for her paper today, which is on Vasi and Arcadia.
I'm just so happy to be a very small part of this, and I'll use the adjective arterial. This arterial event you have going here. I also can, you can almost feel the excitement and very deserved pride in this project. And for me, that excitement is palpable, and for me it's very energizing. All right, so today, Vasi and Arcadia. The interval between Vasi's arrival in Rome and the completion of his major work, La Magnificenza, 1736 to the 1760s, the Accademia degli Arcadi underwent major changes. The following is a story of the Arcadian society and those changes, and an acknowledgement of how Vasi and a few other artist members of the Arcadi came to find mentors and patrons in the organization. Specifically for this talk, I'll be talking about Monsignor Giovanni Gaetano Bottari and the oratorian padre Giuseppe Bianchini. They provided intellectual models for Vasi's Magnificenza. Also, Bottari and Bianchini helped advance his social status to the point in which Vasi, a printmaker, and really, Pace, Keith, I'm very sorry, that a printmaker received the Sperone d'Oro, that is, he was knighted as one of the Order of the Golden Spur for his service in the protection and promotion of the Papal States. And this is really unusual, since knighthoods to artists before the 18th century were reserved for the likes of painters, Titian, Rubens, and Velázquez, and even Velázquez had to fight hard for that. The Accademia degli Arcadi was founded in 1690 by 14 men of varying status in Roman society, although none from the social elite, that is, either high nobility or church officials. They set up this body, this academy, with the intent of restoring the primacy of Italy in cultural matters, that is, in literature and in science. And at this time it was felt that this primacy had been lost to the French in the 17th century. And just FYI, as you probably know, science in the early 18th century umbrellas disciplines that engage knowledge about the natural world, so umbrellas, lots of disciplines. In theory, members of the Arcadi were dedicated to creating and reciting prose and poetry, which in its simplicity and purity of expression was distinguished from the convoluted Baroque literature with its overly complex narrative and its high allegoresis. The purpose of the Arcadi's activity was to practice and acquire eloquence, like that exhibited in the words of the Arcadian shepherd of classical literature, Virgil, for example. With this eloquence, members of the society could express and argue ideas simply, clearly, rationally, and this would lead to the formation of a set of shared cultural values and behaviors, and thus to the idea of a public good, and by extension here, an assurance for good governance. This is in theory. And so you see here the Arcadian insignia. On the one side, you see the pine branch representing Pan, the other the laurel representing Apollo, the two poetically and musically gifted inhabitants of ancient Arcadia, according to the literary sources. And of course in the middle, sorry, of the panpipe of Pan. Society gave members various outlets for this activity, the practice of eloquence. They planned to have regular but seasonal meetings in a rustic outdoor setting, intended to remind the members that they were descendants of these shepherds. They also had special meetings, which included the Giochi Olimpici, the Olympic Games, held about every 4 years, in which 5 distinct poetic games put members in competition. And they also had other meetings for occasions wherein political benefit was sought for the papal court, and I'll return to this point later. But mainly because the meeting places were difficult to come by, they gathered in houses or palaces of various members. And I'll run through quickly a bunch of slides here. The meeting place of the Arcadians was called the Bosco Parazio, the woods of Parazio, as again sort of found in the classical literature. And the red arrows represent basically the places where the Arcadians met, found themselves a rustic setting. And in print form, there has been recorded a few of them, one on the Palatine Hill, and you can see that their meeting place was just a simple thing, surrounded by trees here in the Orti Farnesiani. As time goes along, these meeting places get a little more architectonic, and you can see that someone has actually built them an amphitheater for the recitation of that poetry on the Aventine Hill. And finally, they build their last Bosco Parazio on the Janiculum Hill, still there, in 1726. With that mapped, and here it is in a drawing by Nicola Salvi. And you can see again that the major features, it's located on a hill, the Janiculum Hill, and you see the major feature at the top is, of course, that amphitheater. As a means of eliminating any hierarchy within the organization and of aspiring towards egalitarianism in the realm of ideas, the organization decided to have no patron other than the fairly non-interfering baby Jesus, and to have members take on pseudonyms to disguise their social rank. So I chose 3 Arcadian members, and I'm showing you their pseudonyms, Arcadian pseudonyms. The first name, their pastoral name, usually derived from the name of a shepherd or nymph found in the classical literature. That was sometimes the case, not always. De Chilo, for example, was Chilus is an Arcadian shepherd. Aristillo is after an ancient astronomer, and you can see that James Dawkins there has actually made up his own name, Philomuso, lover of muse, muses, I assume. The second name is derived from the destination name for some geographical feature in ancient Arcadia, although it could also be in ancient Greece in general. Again, in the first case, Tenagrio is a river in Arcadia. Thessalonia, you can see that sort of in the second surname. And then the third surname is the capital city of the island of Lesbos. Again, the English were very cheeky about their names. Despite these names to cover up social status, Arcadia had a special tier of membership, the acclamati, essentially for popes and cardinals, foreign kings, queens, princes, diplomats, and the like, who were honored by the society. Now, between its founding in 1690 and 1766, there were 3 major phases of Arcadia: prima, secunda, terza, keep it simple. The personality of the Arcadian custode, or chief shepherd, and here you see the custode's insignia, shepherd there. Essentially, it's elected administrator, record keeper, and implementer of policy. He shaped the nature of Arcadia. Again, major changes in the 18th century. Our 3 custodi are, here we go, and unfortunately this terrible Getzi caricature. First was Giovanni Maria Crescembeni, 1690, 1728. As you can see, His nickname was Il Nazico, as you can see. The second, Francesco Lorenzini, up until 1743, and the third, Michel Mouret, up until 1766. Vasi's career flourished mostly under the Tice, Mouret's Arcadia. However, to understand how this happened, a brief history of Arcadia Prima and Secundo is needed. Oh, I'll keep in there. Christian Benni was one of the 14 founders of the society, a prelate of modest intellectual means, a bureaucrat. In his Arcadia, Christian Benni was inclusive. During his 38 years in office, he increased the membership dramatically from 14 to over 2,000, to the point where membership was essentially worthless. He argued that the models for good poetry were multiple, and specifically he advocated for the Petrarchan sonnet, which was really easy in form to create, so that there could be wide participation by the membership in this creation of poetry. Also, he allowed for special Arcadian memberships and special meetings that aided the operations of the papal court, that is, coronation of kings, births of princes, etc. To be as brief as possible about the politics of this century, the papacy's secular powers were constantly under attack as foreign powers attempted to curtail the papacy by diminishing papal legal jurisdiction in their countries, by limiting the amount of benefits or tax paid to papal authorities, even by wresting land from papal powers, among other things. The kings of France, Spain, and Portugal, and the Holy Roman Emperor all pushed the papacy of the 18th century in this way. In addition, these powers squared off against each other, and specifically you have the Bourbon of France and Spain against the Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire in major conflicts throughout the century. Papal Rome found itself mostly an ineffective pawn among them. In a politicized Arcadia, however, which acted as kind of a papal annex, the papal court could appear to honor, acclaim one of these foreign powers without officially honoring them, and thereby the papal court could appear neutral in these contentious foreign affairs. And just to show you that again, in fact, the creation of the Bosco Palazzo, their meeting place, happened when the King of Portugal, who was trying to get favors from the papacy, basically used the Arcadia. He donated money to the Arcadia for the building of their garden. Now, a couple of things happened during Christian Benni's office. A splinter group appeared in what the historical literature refers to as the Schism of 1911, led by the very handsome, very tall jurist and law expert and literary theorist Giovanni Vincenzo Gravina, here in two Getzi caricatures. He was followed in the schism by some of the youngest members of Arcadia, who were the most talented poets. For example, Metastasio, Vincenzo Leonio, I don't know if these names are familiar, but you can see, especially in the second, the one on the Getzi caricature on the right, you can see these young boys kind of fawning over this Gravina. The schismatics, as I like to call them, wanted to limit the membership to those who were truly interested in producing good poetry and in pursuing cultural reform. Because the papal court was dependent on the political operations of the Arcadia, it didn't like this schism, and it asked Cardinal Neri Corsini, who was sympathetic to the schismatics' goals, but attached to the papacy. It asked Corsini to negotiate a truce between the two, which happened in 1718. Now, after Christian Benni's death, Neri Corsini, you can see, eventually becomes, on the right there in the engraving, Napoleon, relative of Clement II.